Powerfully built. What he did was a very clever engineering feat. He got his engineers and his soldiers to divert the powerful river Euphrates from its riverbed off to the side. Then he led his men marching down the riverbed under the walls of Babylon where the river normally flowed. As Cyrus gets his men down there, wouldn't you know it, somebody in Babylon has left the gates unlocked. And Cyrus and his men march straight up through the double gates and they take Belshazzar's kingdom as if it was given to him. It was unguarded and open, and he marched straight in. As it was, Belshazzar was in the midst of a party, and you might have heard the saying, the writing is on the wall. I want to encourage you to read through those chapters. I think it's Daniel chapters 4 and 5. You'll see where that story comes from. God gave Belshazzar a judgment moments before Cyrus marched in and killed him. That's in Daniel 5. So indeed God predicted there would be a head of gold followed by a kingdom of silver. And as you see the two arms, this was a double kingdom. A kingdom or an alliance of Medo-Persia. Certainly inferior to the glorious Babylonians, but it did conquer Babylon and ruled the Middle East for 2 centuries. Down here you can see a rough map of the territory that the Medo-Persians occupied from 539 to 331 BC. Well, Daniel goes on in verse 39. Because this kingdom of silver also has limitations. You may remember that it was to be succeeded by another kingdom. A kingdom represented by bronze. And indeed it was. Have a look at Daniel 2:39. Daniel said, next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Well, does anyone know the history well enough to tell us who took over from the Medes and the Persians? Does anyone know? The kingdom of Greece. Yeah, it's a well-known historical fact. Who was at the helm when Greece took over? Alexander the Great. An extremely powerful general, about the age of 30, began to conquer the then-known world. He defeated Darius III of Persia in the famous Battle of Arbela, which took place in 331 BC. The Third World Empire to rule. Well, this man was indeed a powerful man, so powerful that some people said of him, have a look at this, I am persuaded that there was no nation, city, nor people where his name did not reach. There seems to me to have been some divine hand presiding both over his birth and his actions. That's the famous historian Arrian who said that. Fittingly, much of the armour worn by the Greek army was indeed made of bronze, the third metal in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Alexander died just before his 33rd birthday in a drunken stupor. After his death, his empire weakened. It split into several parts until finally, as the history of Rome chapter 10 puts it, on June the 22nd, 168 BC, at the Battle of Pydna, perished the empire of Alexander the Great, 144 years after his death. So here we see that Greece as well comes to its end. And as Greece comes to its end, what did the dream say? Would there be another kingdom? After the belly and thighs of bronze, there would be legs made of iron. Well, these legs of iron represent another kingdom, a strong kingdom. Does anybody know the history and can tell us who followed the kingdom of Greece? Rome, indeed. Now we're getting to more modern history. The Roman Empire, the most fierce of these ancient kingdoms. This is the kingdom that was ruling in the time of Jesus Christ. Let's take a look at this. You remember God predicted in the dream, gold, silver, bronze, iron. Indeed, we have Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, which ruled down to about the mid-4th century AD. Let's look at Daniel 2 and verse 40. This is what it says. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. For iron breaks and smashes everything, and as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the other kingdoms. Well, iron's a fitting symbol for Rome. just as her Caesars declared themselves God, and they demanded the worship of all men. This was indeed a powerful and aggressive kingdom. It was during the Roman rule that two key events took place in this, under the rule of this nation. The first, the birth of Christ in Bethlehem, or the Christmas story. It was a Roman governor, you remember, who made a decree to kill all the male babies 2 years and younger in Bethlehem. He was hoping to kill Jesus. Secondly, there was a Roman governor who let the Jews take Jesus Christ and crucify him. And which kind of soldiers did the crucifixion? It was the Roman soldiers. And a Roman seal, you may remember, was placed over his tomb when he died to try and keep him in it. But now we come to the end of the legs, the end of the fourth kingdom. Does the dream tell us that there will be a fifth kingdom? A head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thigh of bronze, legs of iron. What came next? Feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. Have a look at Daniel chapter 2 and verse 41. Daniel says to King Nebuchadnezzar, who must be just blown away by this dream, he says, just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. In other words, Daniel is predicting 600 years before Christ that there will be 4 world empires and not a fifth, but a divided empire after the fourth. I wonder what the odds would be of getting it right if you were making it up yourself. How do you think you'd go? Is there any way a man could accurately predict the world empires had God not revealed it to him? Well, the iron fibers of this giant Rome begin to disintegrate toward the end of its rule after about 600 years. Through luxury, corruption, and moral decay, Rome begins to weaken. And as she begins to weaken, barbarian tribes begin ruling and taking power from him. And I put a slide up here. Rome became easy prey for these raiding tribes. And as they began to invade from about 351 onwards, Rome's strength began to topple and destabilize. About the year 476, these kingdoms, these barbaric tribes, were completely in control, and Rome's power had been completely lost. Emperor Augustus was deposed, and Rome divided into many segments, represented by the feet and toes of iron and clay. You can see them here. We have the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, the Alemanni, and so on. You may remember, you may have recognized some of these names. Look at what Daniel says. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And indeed, as Rome divided into these divisions of Western Europe as we know it today, some of them were strong, some of them were weak. In fact, some of them have been conquered and are no longer with us today. Most historians give us this description of the remaining tribes. Have a look here. The Alemanni became known as the Germans in modern day. The Burgundians are now known as the Swiss. The Franks are the French, the Lombards are the Italians, the Saxons, of course, are the English, the Suevi are Portuguese, the Visigoths became the Spanish. And you see at the bottom there are 3 of the 10 which no longer exist today. They are now extinct. Well, God gives a prophecy that these kingdoms would try and unite. They would try and mix together. But he also said that they would not cleave together. These feet of iron and clay would never again be one material. They would never again be united or unified. Oh, there were people who tried. And if you look at the history of Western Europe, you'll find that there's this sordid tale of intermarriage and trying to unite Western Europe. In Denmark, you'll find a palace by the name of Fredericton Castle. And on one of the walls in Fredericton Castle, you'll see the family tree of the royal families of Europe about that time. You see, all of them were related through intermarriage. This is what it looks like. It's quite interesting. Through intermarriage, they tried to unite these divided kingdoms together. God said